This is the fourth in our all-in session to kind of bring to life, if you like, the all-in actions as we've announced them. And I'm delighted we've got an incredible panel of speakers this morning to just go through this all-in action for gender, improving the experience and representation of women in the advertising industry in the UK. Before we introduce them and start our panel discussion, I'm really pleased that Dan from Cradles is joining us this morning just to give us a top line on the data for this group for women in the industry. So without further ado, because we've lost a few minutes, but we will make up the time, I'm going to hand over to Dan Wilkes, who I hope is there.
Yeah, morning everybody. As Sharon said, I'm just going to run through some of the top line findings that are relevant to the gender and the action point that we're here to talk about today. I've just got a few slides, so I'll share my screen. Hopefully people can see that. Can people see this? Excellent. Okay, so before we get on to the specifics,
I've got. Can you hear this?
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's right. No problem. So before we get into specifics, just a quick reminder about the all-in census itself. It was conducted in March last year, and it received over 16,000 responses from across the full spectrum of the advertising industry. So brands and advertisers, the agencies, and also the media owners. That was an absolutely huge response. It's the largest survey response ever recorded for our industry, but it's also the largest sort of diversity and inclusion survey of any industry in the UK that we're aware of. And we equated that to an investment time of over £500,000. So again, thank you for everyone that took part and promoted the survey, because it really was a kind of a trailblazer in terms of its participation. Looking at particular representation around gender, so overall 59% of the respondents were women, 41% were men. So that is slightly higher response from women than maybe we'd expect, but it's probably only a few percent we've kind of correlated and cross-referenced with other surveys, and we'd expect that's not actually as large a discrepancy as it may seem, and it is probably quite similar to the genuine picture. We also asked people to identify whether they were non-binary or preferred to self-describe. So 0.3% of respondents identified as non-binary. That's about 50 people of the 16,000. And 0.1% identified as preferred to self-describe, about 20 people. It's obviously very important that we've captured that and we have data on those individuals. But in the following charts that I'm about to talk through, I will focus just on the male and female breakdown, because those numbers are so small and unable to do further analysis we're about to look at. So one of the first things that jumped out is that women outnumber men in the workforce quite significantly until around about the age group of 35 to 44. Women over 35 in the industry, about 42%, which compared to the working population is actually much smaller, which is 66% of the working female population is over 35, compared to just 42% in the advertising industry. And as you can see there, you've got 58% of the women working in the industry are under 34, and that really starts to tail off after that age, where the proportion of men increases. There's also a significant variation by function and department. So this slide shows the top three departments with the highest proportion of women in them, and the three departments with the lowest proportion of women in them. So as you can see there, IT, just 25% of those departments across the industry are women. But perhaps more tellingly and more surprisingly, there is 39% of the C-suite positions are women. So that's the the senior leaders across the industry, 39% for women, and the creative departments across the industry, 40% women. So those are the three functions or areas within the industry that have the lowest representation of women. At the opposite end of the scale, HR, office services, and legal departments have the highest proportion of women and are by far, the majority women-based working in those areas. One area that's particularly relevant to this kind of action point around flexible working is part-time working and how it negatively impacts women. So of all the women working in the industry, 9% are part-time workers. So that's not a massive percentage in itself, but it does represent 88% of all part-time workers are women. And 78% of those women say that they work part-time due to childcare responsibilities. And again, 48% of those women that are working part-time believe it has negatively impacted their career and continues to do so. Now, obviously, in terms of focus and resource, representation gets a lot of kind of attention, but it's just one element of the challenge. And many women also experience barriers to progression, alienation, and demeaning behaviour. And the survey really revealed that currently women encounter negative work experiences at a consistently higher rate than men. And again, linked to this, the action point 4, we looked at parental leave. And interestingly, the actual proportions of people taking parent leave was fairly similar for women and men. So 9% of women had taken parental leave in the last 5 years versus 13% of men. But where the discrepancy really comes in is the impact it has on the career. So over half of the women taking parental leave believe that it had negatively impacted their career compared to just 5% of men. So there's clearly something going on there about the duration of parental leave that is being taken and how it is being viewed within the workforce and within the company. There was also significant variation in terms of career progression, and 41% of women believe that family responsibilities hinder career progression compared to just 26% of men. 26% believe that gender hinders career progression compared to 11% of men, and around 35% of women believe that their company does not provide equal pay for equal work, which again was a higher proportion than men that believe that to be the case. So some real variation there between men and women in what they see as barriers to career progression, and the point around family responsibilities is absolutely key to this action point 4 that we're here to talk about. So in terms of company culture, 29% of women believe that their company does not treat everyone equally based on their gender. And again, that was more than double the proportion of men that thought that was the case. And 28% of women do not see people like themselves in senior management positions, which again was significantly higher than the proportion of men. So just a few indications there around differing culture and perceptions of it between the sexes. In terms of demeaning behaviour, which is ultimately probably the most troubling issues that we covered in the survey, women were more likely to feel that they'd been to have experienced being unfairly spoken over or not listened to in meetings, 28%. They were also more likely to feel undervalued compared to colleagues of equal competence, and they were also much more likely to personally experience sexual discrimination. So 12% of the women that responded to the survey had personally experienced sexual discrimination, and that's in the last 12 months, compared to 2% of men. And finally, all of the culmination of all of these experiences and negative impacts resulted in the fact that 15% of women were likely to leave the industry because of a lack of inclusion or discrimination that they had experienced. And that compares to 9% of men. So again, much more likely for women to feel the need to leave the industry because of these negative experiences in the workplace. And that is it. Thank you all for listening. Enjoy the rest of the session.
Thanks so much, Dan.
If anybody does have any questions, then you can get in touch with me afterwards.
Yeah, I was going to say, perhaps we can share this with the group afterwards, but thanks so much for sharing that top line.
Bear with me.
Stop sharing, that'd be fab. Thank you so much. So just as a reminder, I mean, we announced the action for gender back at the Renew Summit in January. And as with the initial 3 actions in the All-In plan, it's a very simple call to action. And so it's to take the flexible first checklist. And this session is really just to tell you a bit more about the checklist itself, to hear from some industry leaders about how they know and think it's going to impact their business and their lives personally, I would have thought as well. And obviously, as ever, there's all the information you need about the data that Dan has shared, the wider All-In census results and the action plan on the All-In hub, which we can share later on. So I'm delighted to be joined today by 2 incredible Kates. Kate Waters, who is Director of Client Strategy and Planning, Commercial and Online at ITV. And I guess most relevantly for this session, she's also President of WACL, who developed the Flexible First Checklist. Also, Kate Rawlinson, who's the CEO of MediaCom, and Dara Nasser, who is the Managing Director at Twitter. So I'm going to hand over first of all to Kate W, I'm going to call you for purposes of this call, just to tell us a bit more about the Flexible First Checklist for those on the call who haven't downloaded it yet, just what they can expect and what it's measuring.
Thanks ever so much. So I think probably the place to start with this is just a very brief, I guess, summary of why we thought that the Flexible First Checklist was a good thing to make the action on gender. Because I think actually talking to people, it's possibly not immediately apparent in some respects. But very simply, what we know from, you can see it in the data there, is that if flexible working is a cultural norm, it makes it easier for women to stay in work for longer, and indeed actually it plays a role in closing that sort of persistent and pernicious gender pay gap. So we know that the gender pay gap in the industry is about 24% compared with about 18% more generally. So we are worse than everybody else, and part of that is because it's much harder for women to progress to those senior roles, to do roles that are better paid. Because, fundamentally, women want to be able to work more flexibly. They want to be able to perhaps work 4 days a week or work flexibly in different places. And so we felt obviously in kind of consultation with everybody at All-In, that actually focusing on flexible working was a really sort of clear and focused way of beginning to address some of the issues around gender in the industry. Now, clearly, it's not going to address them all. I'm always horrified when I see those statistics about kind of the cultural sort of imbalance, being spoken over in meetings, all of those sorts of things. Now, this is probably not going to help address that, but we do believe that actually what it begins to do is to sort of just enable more women to progress to more senior roles. That builds more positive role models. And also, actually, it's not just about women. It's, we think flexible working is a good thing for everyone, actually, because what it begins to do is to normalize. For example, you saw that massive disparity in men and women taking parental leave. I know that we were talking about this with Dara yesterday. It sounds like at Twitter you've managed to equalise that, which is brilliant. But more generally, there is a chasm between the proportion of women who take up parental leave and the proportion of men who take up their full allocation. If we can normalise flexible working, if we can make it feel like it is something that is accepted by everybody, that where the people who work flexibly are equally valued and feel like they can make a sensible contribution, can progress further, then that just becomes better for everybody. So it's another reason why we think that the Flexible First Checklist, or the focus on flexible working, is right for this gender action. So looking at the Flexible First Checklist, it's at its simplest, right? It's a questionnaire, and it's one that helps you understand and think through all of the different aspects of flexible working, and the things that as organisations you need to begin to pay attention to if you're going to basically do flexible working well. So It's designed, yes, if you kind of score high marks on it, you get either a standard mark or you get a leadership mark, but actually it works very, it's got much more benefit than just that, because actually what it really does begin to do is help you identify the places where perhaps you need to pay a bit more attention. So it divides into 5 sections. These 5 sections, it's worth saying, have been discussed, debated, and kind of pulled together, but with a panel of experts, including kind of HR professionals. And the 5 areas that it explores are HR policy and knowledge. So that is really all about getting the basics in place, making sure you've got a flexible working policy, and that you have a full understanding of what flexibility means, because it's even though the pandemic has kind of made us focus very much on working from home and working from different locations as a form of flexibility. It's a much broader definition than that. So it's about part-time working, it's about time shifting, it's term time hours, all of these different ways in which people can make their contribution to the workplace in a way that they are, that enables them to work best. So that's the kind of policy and knowledge section. Then we get into the kind of logistics, the kind of really practical stuff around infrastructure, technology, because if people are going to work flexibly, they need to be able to access the systems to be able to kind of work effectively and efficiently. I don't know if there's anybody else on the call from ITV here, but certainly this is something where I think we could probably work a little bit harder. So we've all got the kit, but there, as always with big companies and tech, there's always more that one can do, I think, to make that a little bit easier. Employee support systems is the kind of 3rd area that the checklist looks at. And this is, I think, really fundamental actually as we come back from the pandemic into the sort of office environment, because it is really about training managers to understand how to manage for outcomes, how to essentially assess the I guess the competence and the contribution of all employees based on what they produce, not based on where they happen to be sitting or whether or not they're in the same space as their boss at the same time. And that requires us, I think, to really sort of train and support managers to enable them to do that properly. It's also about providing, I think, employees with sort of support groups, so whether that is, at ITV, we're very good at this. We have a women's group, we have an LGBTQ+ group, we have a group for parents, we have a group for those from ethnic minorities, we have a group for those with disabilities. So all of those provide incredibly valuable sort of resource and emotional support for people who might be needing it. And then I think the area that is often most overlooked, but is actually the most important, I think, for the long-term embedding of flexible working into our workplace cultures, is the measurement of the impact. So actually it's all, and this is something that we at ITV have got a lot of work to do. And I think it's a really exciting area, which is not just to understand who is working flexibly, but to understand how that translates into business metrics. So what impact does that have on our employee engagement scores? What impact does that have on productivity? What impact does that have on the bottom line, if we could ever get to that as a kind of measure? So really proving the business case for flexibility is a kind of key area to sort of think about if you are talking about properly involving flexible working. And then finally, the kind of the 5th area is the one where I think it's where you begin to see policy properly turn into practice. And this is, if there is one difference, I guess, between the companies who take the checklist and who do really well and those who do slightly less well in terms of overall score, it is about this kind of, essentially the move from shifting from intention to action. And so culture and leadership and role modeling and demonstrating actually that you're not just paying lip service to the idea, but actually you are properly sort of driving from the front. This is a kind of key area for businesses to focus on as well. So the checklist only takes 10 minutes or so to complete. As I say, it's a really helpful sort of diagnostic tool, as well as, if you complete the right number of questions, you obviously get a mark that you can use to demonstrate you are a flexible first company. But I really strongly recommend that everybody does it. It's an incredibly useful tool. So that's it from me in terms of an overview.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Kate. Hopefully that's sort of brought a bit of it to life. Kate R, from a MediaCom point of view, I know you've already implemented flexible working in the business. It'd be really good to hear about how that works for you and why you think it is better for business.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Sharon. So, I mean, I don't think we can really build a diverse business at all unless we're offering flexible working. So I think it's pretty fundamental for us, because we're so focused on having an inclusive agency with diverse representation across the business. And just a little bit about my own personal experience of MediaCom, actually, to begin with. So I came back to MediaCom, having worked there right at the beginning of my career, about 11 years ago. And I came back into a global role. So I was running new business for the EMEA region. It was the first time I'd done a global role. But I was also coming back from my second maternity leave. So I had a baby and a toddler. There was a lot of travel. It was running new business. So, you know, pretty full on job. But Nick Lawson, now our global CEO, my boss at the time, allowed me to do that job flexibly. So, you know, I think there's a perception that global roles are not flexible, and also that, and I think the data supports this, there aren't lots of women. I think women are underrepresented, particularly in global positions, but I did that job 4 days a week. And I think there's also inherently more flexibility actually in global roles, because when you travel, you know, when you come back, you know, you work from home and you just kind of flex it because you're spending time away from home. So I think my experience 11 years ago coming into MediaCom was a very good one. And Nick has long been a cheerleader for women in our business and hugely supportive. And we know that maternity leave and return from maternity leave is a pinch point. So this is when women are often discriminated against. And we know from the data that you've just seen, so 53% say that a career break has negatively impacted their career, 48%, I knew this would happen. Sorry, I've got a new kitten and I knew she was gonna start meowing, I'm really sorry. Great timing. You know, 48% say that working part-time has negatively impacted their career. And that wasn't my experience at MediaCom. And in fact, I flourished in MediaCom, was able to perform my role on a flexible basis and progress through the business, and became CEO in September 2019 for the UK. I actually now work full-time because my kids are older and at school. But I just think, you know, we cannot underestimate the importance of all roles being available flexibly, especially senior roles. So it's really important for women that they can look up and see senior women. So again, in some of the stats we saw there, 28% of women don't see women in senior roles, and that's a problem. Role modelling is really important. And at MediaCom UK, we actually have slightly more senior women than men. So my leadership team is equal, gender, male, female. And I do think this is down to our inclusive culture and the fact that we allow our people to work more flexibly, and have done so for a long time. And our approach to flexible working is called MediaCom My Way. And I really have to call out our CPO, Elaine Bremner, who has really driven this. Personally, it's a passion point for her, and the rest of the people team who have made this a reality. So we have a policy. It's here, it's written down. It's only 3 pages long. It's super simple. Don't overcomplicate it, because actually, flexibility is inherently bespoke and down to the individual circumstance. So I don't think it's about having a very complex policy. It's about having a policy that allows people to have a discussion with the line manager about flexibility. And the way that we talk about MediaCom My Way, it's all about encouraging our people to find a good balance between home and work life. So we talk about blend. So blending your work life and your home life. So I'm just going to read this from the policy. This is what it says. So in conjunction with your line manager, MediaCom My Way gives you the ability to choose where and when you deliver your best work. It's about taking ownership for the success of the business, whilst creating space for other aspects of your life that bring you happiness and fulfillment. And you can do that on a temporary basis, so fluid working, or a permanent fixed working basis. And anyone can apply. So it's open to anyone. As I say, it's very individual. You know, everybody's circumstance is different. And I think that's the way that we approach it. It's very much down to your own individual circumstance and situation. All our roles are offered on a flexible basis. I think pre-pandemic, we had really good uptake on this. As I've said, you know, we're overrepresented in senior women, director up. And I think that is in part down to our flexible working approach. But, you know, obviously the pandemic's changed everything. And now I think there's just an expectation that there will be more flexible working across genders. And I think this is a really good thing, because when I look at the data, it still is predominantly women who take up these flexible working approaches. I really want to see that change, because I think, again, role modeling is really important. The more men who work flexibly, the more men will work flexibly. So you know, we do have men working flexibly, just not as many as women. So hopefully that provides a good summary of where we are at MediaCom.
Yeah, no, that's really insightful. Thanks, Kate. And it tees brilliantly up to Dara, actually, to hear from a man, and to hear specifically how you've implemented it, not just in Twitter as a sort of large global organisation, but how it's benefiting men specifically.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for your time. Kate R didn't mention one thing. She has got a new kitten, but also it's called Mavis, which is a fantastic name. Yeah, I think a couple of things here, and you know, I found the stats from Dan, you know, sadly probably unsurprising, but also at the same time quite mind-blowing that there was such a difference in certain angles. I think one of the things that we've done at kind of Twitter is in setting up flexible working is that this was going on pre-pandemic. A lot of the people at the US, I have to say that a lot of it's across engineering, predominantly in the US pre-pandemic. A lot of the engineers worked from home full time as well as flexibly, etc. And in fact, in engineering, it's quite a cultural thing to do again pre-pandemic, 1 day a week from home, which would be like their creative day or something, of just trying to zone out and doing various other things. So we started looking into it, flexible working, much before. In fact, Jack Dorsey years ago committed to go to every office within a calendar year to see everyone. And then someone told him, but there are also people's homes that their offices. So he went to those homes as well, and he did it. And actually, he was really enthused by that. So when the pandemic did kick off, we could pivot. It wasn't as difficult probably for us to pivot. However, in truth, very, very few people flexibly worked. They might have known it was on offer, but you know, they'd been brought up in a world, including myself, that we never did. You know, my job was 100% 9 to 5, Monday to Friday or whatever, in an office. And albeit, yes, latterly, there were more days that I would every so often work from home. It wasn't really a thing. And I think that interestingly, Kate W from ITV mentioned that we were chatting about the parental leave and stuff. It's something we tried to do years ago, where again, you know, everyone knows that parental leave in the US is almost non-existent. I think they get about, you know, 20 minutes off, and then you got to go back to work. And then so we gave everyone 5 months. You know, it didn't matter whether you were female, male, you all got 5 months, and everyone took that off. And I think what's really important in this, I mentioned Jack Dorsey and others, it really has to come from the top, because people don't feel empowered otherwise to take it. So, and you can say, right, well, it's fair enough if the CEO or someone who's likely to be older and has had children to say this, but they don't see the CEO taking that time off. And I was recounting a story yesterday to the wonderful team that I'm speaking to here, that, you know, essentially our chief business officer had a child and lives in New York, again, of a culture that is very few holidays, very little time off. You know, you only take more than a week if you're on honeymoon, etc. And I said, what are you going to do about the 5 months? He said, I don't know. Why? And I said, because whatever you do, everyone will see as the benchmark. So regardless of gender, you know, a man will just think, okay, I'll do less than Matt or the same as. And a woman will think, well, I'll probably do more, and then I won't have a career to come back to. And I'm just, you know, and it's kind of demoralizing either way, you know, but obviously way worse for the females in there. And that compounds what Dan was saying. So, and I said, look, you have to take basically you have to take all of it, you know, whether you want to or not. And obviously everyone wants to. It's whether they feel they ought to or they should or whatever. So we did, and I genuinely think it's easier to impose when, or pivot to more flexible working when it comes from the top. Now, in terms of the question, how do we do that? You know, how does it impact males, or how can we? We don't really look at it that way. It's essentially one rule for everyone, and when it's parental leave, for example, people take it up. We ensure that people take it up equally. We make it very clear that it doesn't impact, you know, we have several meetings and, you know, try to make it very clear that it doesn't impact females when they go off on a maternity break or whatever and come back. In fact, someone in the senior team got promoted whilst off on maternity. Not because she was in the office or to make a point, it's because she was the best candidate. As simple as that. It wasn't easy for the company because we had to wait till she comes back, but it's not just the right message, it's the right thing to do, and it's best for the company. So we don't really, you know, and when I look at flexible working in terms of working from home, we haven't mandated people to go back into the office as yet. It's still, people are going back into the office because, by the way, everyone recounts, oh yeah, you lot can work from home forever, you know, because that's what, you know, Dorsey said. The truth of the matter is, yes, he said, people whose job allow it, i.e. non-customer facing staff, if they can work from home and they want to work from home, they can, as long as, you know, they have to fill in an application, and that's full time. You know, to be totally candid, in the London, which is 450 people, one person has applied and is now working from home on a full-time basis. Everyone else is doing a hybrid model. Everyone loves going into the office. Everyone loves working from home. And I think the key thing is reimagining or repurposing what an office was. An office was somewhere to do your work and the only place to do your work before. And what people didn't really talk about as much was the other benefits of working in an office, you know, whether that be, you know, not having meetings, because, you know, we've proved we can have meetings on Zoom or whatever, but just, you know, the serendipitous chatting to people about an idea, someone else chiming in that wasn't part of the conversation, doing a better idea. And, you know, I look on the screen and I can see Pippa, and I've been friend of Pippa for a long time. You know, I know that if I worked in the same office as Pippa, we'd just laugh a lot. In fact, we just talk about stuff like sweets, you know, so, which isn't really conducive to maybe work productivity, but it just makes your day more fun, makes you happier, and probably makes you more successful. I love radishes, by the way, whoever's put that in the comment. I genuinely do love radishes. So anyway, we need to repurpose that, and then flexibility is around for everyone. We're not counting if it's men who are at home or women who are at home, and don't really care, as long as the work gets done. And I think that people are, you know, working out now that, you know, even though we're not mandating it, but what we're finding is people organize with one another, not just people who work closely with one another, what days they're going in and they coordinate, but just people who they like and they coordinate. So maybe they go for a drink afterwards or go for a run or whatever, you know, just see them. And I think that that's where we are on it. But I think, look, just one thing, I'm sorry for rambling, but I think what I think is really important is that in terms of implementing it, we don't know what the right thing is. So we're doing little things and trying them. If they don't work, we'll then do something else. But the point is we're committed to it. And what I hate is if you read stuff in the press saying, oh, the banking industry want everyone back, and I don't know how true or not it is. What I fear is that maybe, you know, the old school want it to fail. So in a few years' time, everyone's forced back, you know, somehow. I don't know how that would work, you know, but And I think it's just incumbent on us to say, look, let's just make the best of it. Let's try some stuff. Let's fail some stuff, and then let's just carry on until we try, do as best as we can. So I'll say, sorry for rambling. But
no, that's brilliant. You sort of teed it up actually, because I wanted to hear from everybody. So I feel you've covered it. Is, this clearly has to work for the individuals, for their colleagues, and for employers. And as you say, it's completely sort of new territory for us looking at this, universally. So, I mean, are there any builds on, because you've covered so much of it there, Dara, in terms of some great ideas about how to communicate this to everybody. But are there any builds from either Kate, both Kates, in terms of, advice about how people can manage this and for it to be able to work for all stakeholders?
I think you just have to approach it on the basis that whatever you do first is probably going to be wrong, and it will iterate and you'll learn over time. Because I think we were full of kind of intentions about getting everybody in the office for 2 days a week at the same time, and it just hasn't worked in practice. But people are coming in. But I do think, and Dara, you made reference to this, you sort of have to pay really close attention to what you want to use the office for, if we're talking about the kind of when you're at home and when you're in the office. And different teams and different people work best in different ways. And so I think it is it's sort of exciting. I think it's a brilliant opportunity to kind of reimagine how we work and to try and make it work better for everyone. And that's something that it's going to be hard, but I think is, if we want it to work, it can be better for everyone without a doubt.
Hey, anything to add on that in terms of how it could work for everyone?
I think what I always say is flexible working requires flexibility on both sides. So I think that often, it's down to the employer to be flexible. And I think, the employee has to be, so you kind of have to meet somewhere. This is why I was saying it's a very individual thing. So it really, agreeing a flexible working approach with someone is a discussion, a negotiation, a conversation, that takes into account the needs of the business and the needs of the person. So for example, when I was doing the global job, I would travel, obviously, because you have to be open to travel when you're working in a global role, but I wasn't prepared to travel every week, for example. So I think it's really important that we have flexibility on both sides, and that we come to the table and agree it in that way. But I agree with Kate. I mean, I think this year, we were chatting about this in our pre-call yesterday, I think, it is a transition year in terms of the hybrid working thing. I think we are just reacting to how people, want to work, and we're changing things all the time. We've got to be really flexible in how we implement hybrid working.
It's been the pandemic's been almost a gift, isn't it, in terms of that just kick-starting the whole process and launching us into completely uncharted water. And it's up to us to make the most of it from here, from this starting point. So I think that's a real positive. I'm conscious of time. I would love to open out in case there's some questions from people on the call. And if everyone's happy, we can just roll over by maybe 3 minutes. I'll keep an eye, because we did start a bit late. Are there any questions?
Hi there, I've got a question. Nicola Morgan from DDB Remedy. Just wanted to gauge the reaction about, it feels like a lot of this is around people having children. But if you're opening up flexible working to everybody, what does that really mean? And what's the appetite for allowing and encouraging that? If someone just wants to work 4 days a week, but are still a sort of senior role in their career, they haven't really got a rationale for it. It's just they know they're going to have a more relaxed working week. It's going to be much better to manage their household. Maybe they are single and therefore they don't have, somebody to support them running the household, paying the bills, doing all the things that it takes in the modern day. What does that really mean to you guys, and how do you feel about it? Because I just think there's still a stigma around that. And I think with the focus is so much about children and childcare. And I don't know if that, I think that as we go forward, people are not getting married, and not everybody is having children. And I think we're just going to see that more and more. And over the next 10 years, it's going to evolve. So just be interested to see how you're making sort of preparations for that change.
Thanks so much, Nicola. That's such a great question. Who wants to pick it up first?
Oh no.
Okay, I'll jump in very quickly. I think it's a brilliant question, and I think it is. I think that all the things that you've talked about are totally fair justifications for working part-time. You know, my children have left home, but I've got two very elderly and vulnerable parents. So actually, that for me is is another, and I've been thinking about it actually as they get much older and as they may not be around for very long. Now is probably the time where I would like to think about, cutting my hours, working a bit more flexibly, making sure I can see them. So I think it's totally justifiable, and the working world has changed, and humans are living longer. None of us have got those kind of final salary pensions. Lots of people have got side hustles. All of these things are going to be enormous influences, I think, on how we work. So I think, to come back to the point, the trouble with flexibility is it has to work for the individual, for the team, and for the company. So getting that kind of tripartite relationship working is the tricksy thing. But frankly, I think if people want to be able to work part-time, it shouldn't matter why. What should only matter is how do we make that work for them and for the company and for the team.
Absolutely. Dara, did you want to jump in?
Same as Kate, just I totally agree with her. I think that, but you do make a great point. I think that it's not people with it. I suppose it's easier to default to people with children because they have this immediate, essentially, drain on them, like a joyous drain, but a drain nonetheless, because, they're dependent on you, etc. You do make a great point, because again, just like pre-pandemic, when you're expected to be in an office 5 days a week, 9 to 5, whatever it is, now, if you're but you're still expected to work 5 days a week, 9 to 5, regardless of where you are. And I think you make a great point. But again, I think you should be able to do that. In terms of how we're preparing for it, I think that was all, one of the questions. I think when we look at flexibility, we look at every case. I think Kate makes an amazing point about it being a tripartite relationship. It has to suit all parties, just like with, when we started things saying, if you want to work from home 5 days a week, you can, but there had to be a form of, you can't just do it from day one. You had to go through this process, very quick process, saying, right, what do you do? How is your role impact others? Do you need to be present within the same space as others to do it? And if you don't, all of those things are ticked, then go on for it. But I think, again, it has to suit you, the company and the team you work with. I think that's a really good way of putting it. But yeah, it's something that we need to be aware of. People don't necessarily want to work 5 days a week.
Yeah,
and nor should they have to.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting about the narrative around it, because I think it can sometimes feel like, it is only for people who are in relationships and have families. And I think it can start to feel like, people who haven't got that, might not be able to get that because they're always at the office or, at their desk. So it's an interesting, I just think it's been interesting listening to the narrative and how it sort of feels like there's a bit of a block on that. But yeah, super.
That's such a good point, and really we'll definitely feed that in and weave it into how we communicate the action going forward. Kate R, did you want to have a final word on it before we wrap up?
Well, I would only be violently agreeing with everybody, really. I mean, we don't stipulate in our policy, a reason why you would want to take flexible working. It's available to anyone who wants to apply. Right. I mean, my own personal experience is I only wanted to work flexibly once I've had kids, but perhaps we should promote more widely the people who are working flexibly for different reasons. So I think that's I'm going to look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is a conversation that we could just go on for hours. It's so insightful and interesting. We'll definitely have another session in the next few months. It'd be great to hear from all of the businesses on the call as to how this is working in your organisation. A bit like the flexible first checklist, we're going to be launching sort of all-in champion status, so that for everybody that can evidence that they've implemented all the 6 actions so far, you'll get a mark to say that you're an all-in champion. And we're launching that in June at a special parliamentary reception. So do get in touch if you want more details about that and a bit more detail about the other actions. But this, as I say, is a continuing series of events. Do join us for the next one. We're going to be looking at the action around Asian talent, and then the one on ageism. And it's just really nice to build a community around this work, so that we're all feeding, like Nicola has today, just sort of feeding into it in real time and helping us shape it going forward. So Thanks so much for your time today. Thanks to Kate and Dara and Mavis, who we saw very briefly, and to Dan, of course, with the top line on the data. And we'll see you very soon. Have a great day.